You're listening to UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. Ask why. UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio.
Welcome back, folks, to United We Strike Radio. This is our first marathon of 2011, a year that is going to be very exciting indeed. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to one of my friends who has been supportive of the movement, beginning with TaxFree15.com. And actually, he was supportive of Tax Holiday 2009 when this got off the ground. And he has been just great and offers me time to come on his station. He is the host of Behind the Woodshed on Oracle Broadcasting, and I'm going to introduce Hal now and let him introduce you to his very special guest. So welcome to the program, Hal. Thank you for being part of it.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for inviting me again. As you were talking way back when you started to bring on your simple little don't lie, don't comply, and ask why, it was exactly what I was talking about withdrawal from the system that's been offered to us, stop engaging in all their products. And so this was almost a natural marriage, if you will, of ideas. And again, simplifying an action was what caught my mind. And so here we are together a couple of years later, and I appreciate that you've been sticking it out. And amazing amount of energy around this, and global. That's the most amazing thing to us. We're going out global. This is an international broadcast. I'm just fascinated by it. And today I have Ellen Brown with us. Ellen Brown developed her research skills as an attorney practicing civil litigation in Los Angeles. In Web of Debt, her latest book, it's Web of Debt, she turns those skills to an analysis of the Federal Reserve and the money trust. She shows how this private cartel has usurped the power to create money from the people themselves, and how we, the people, can get it back. She currently has an article published on HuffingtonPost.com called "The Fed Has Spoken: No Bailout on Main Street," no bailout for Main Street. Where she tells us, folks, that the Federal Reserve was set up by the bankers for the bankers, and it certainly has served them well. Out of the blue pops out the $12.3 trillion in nearly interest-free credit to bail the banks themselves out in money they created. Ellen Brown, welcome to the UWS Broadcast Marathon event.
Good. Thanks. Great to be talking to you.
Well, we were talking a little bit. This is an ad hoc type together. You took I have to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to help. We had another guest, and that didn't work out in the last minute, and so we haven't really had too much time to talk. But I went through and read your articles, and it sounds like you've been really hot on the trail of the Fed, and I'm really interested more in the end where you say how we're going to get it back. But explain a little bit about the Federal Reserve, and I would ask international listeners not attached to the United States understand the Federal Reserve is just a central bank of the world, essentially, as you get it through the IMF and other things and other functionaries, as the world goes to corporate governance principles. And most of the things that you see coming up around the world are actually hiding a financial construct of control. So, Ellen, your research is probably going to be rising very quickly to the top of the peak for people to be able to concentrate their studies. Again, what can you tell us a little bit about the Federal Reserve here and how the bankers made the banks for themselves and their ability to just create money out of thin air?
Mm-hmm. The Federal Reserve was set up in 1913 to backstop bank runs. The reason we have bank runs is that the whole fractional reserve system, the whole banking system, is based on a shell game, an illusion, where banks lend money that they don't really have. So essentially they're leveraging their deposits or they lend out their deposits, or what they do is they create loans on their books, and then when the checks leave the bank, they have to go through this reserve pool, and to get the money for the reserve pool, they borrow it from the depositor. So they're not really lending the depositors money. In other words, you, the depositor, can go into the bank and get your money at any time, and yet at the same time it's formed the basis for this loan. And periodically, when we were on a gold standard, people would figure out that the banks didn't have enough money, enough gold to cover all their liabilities, and they would all rush to the bank at once, and whoever got there first got the gold, and the rest were out of luck. And So this created distrust in the banking system, as well it should have. But to backstop that, they set up the Federal Reserve, which has the power to just create money with accounting entries. It's the lender of last resort, as it's called, which means if you can't get the money anywhere else, you can go to the Fed and they'll just write you a loan on their books. Basically, they'll write an overdraft on their books. So what they did recently with the credit collapse of 2008 in the fall was they created various facilities that allowed the banks and other financial institutions to get credit from the Federal Reserve, which was credit that the Fed just created on its books. So all in all, we heard recently they came up with $12.3 trillion in dollars just created on their books. I mean, much of it was just overnight loans, but there was, in addition, there was $3 trillion of that was actually money created on their books with which they bought toxic assets off the books of the banks and gave them good money in return. So,
was it actually good money, or is it just more fraud?
Well, yeah, it's what I'm saying is they traded toxic assets for money that wasn't toxic, but it was still created under. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't
it's it's money laundering then.
Well, it wasn't our tax money. Yeah, sort of. You could put it that way. They're cleaning up the books.
Oh man,
what
a mess. So go ahead.
They're there to serve the banks. Their mandate is to serve the bank. It's in the Federal Reserve Act that they can do all this. But the municipal governments or state and local governments states are in debt to the tune of $140 billion, which is 1/100th. It's pretty close to less than 100th of the $12.3 trillion. In other words, just a drop in the bucket compared to what the Fed was able to come up with for the banks. But the Fed said last Friday, a week ago, that they were not going to bail out state and municipal governments because it wasn't in their mandate. It's not written in the law. In other words, they could easily do it. They could come up with money in the same way that they did for the banks. But they don't serve state and local governments. They serve the banks. So
wasn't there, as I was reading your article in Huffington Post, there was lots of questions I had as I was reading along, and a lot of it's just my just abject ignorance in all of this, and maybe lots of people. But in summary, I got lots of questions about this point alone. Wouldn't this be a jurisdictional problem also with the way the organic governments were supposedly established, notwithstanding our conceptualization that they're all political subdivisions of the federal side? And then wouldn't that be instructing the states that they better make up their own answer?
Exactly, and that's my proposed solution. If they're not going to bail us out, we can do exactly what Wall Street did. In other words, we can set up our own state-owned banks. That's what I think. Every state should have its own bank. And there's one state that does this, North Dakota. The Bank of North Dakota is their bank. It's set up as a DBA of the state, doing business as. So it's set up as North Dakota doing business as the Bank of North Dakota. That means all of the state's assets, technically, are the assets of the bank. So they don't have a capital problem. And their deposits, by law, all their state revenues go into the Bank of North Dakota. Plus they take municipal deposits and commercial deposits and consumer deposits. So they have a huge deposit base. So they've got the capital and deposit requirements covered, and they can leverage all that into credit, very cheap credit for the state, and also cheap loans for the people. And they have a public mandate. You know, there's nobody creaming profits off the top. They're not trying to exploit their own banks here. They're just civil servants being bankers. And as it has worked out, North Dakota is the only state that has a huge surplus when everybody else is teetering on bankruptcy. California is probably the worst. We've got a $27 billion deficit coming up. And North Dakota is sitting there thinking, should we lower taxes or should we add services or build some infrastructure? I mean, they're trying to figure out what to do with the money.
Your explanation here about North Dakota, it's got me thinking about what I've been suggesting, and a lot of my thoughts on this came from Walter Burien and the study of the CAFRs, that you monetize the assets of the state, and then you let the states use that as the asset to print their current. Actually, under the Constitution, aren't they supposed they have the right to coin money, Now, I guess they could make private script. They could actually do that electronically. But again, the bottom line there was that they would you monetize the assets of the state, cause money to be available. That seemed to be a pretty honest way of doing things. And then the other thing that I thought I had is North Dakota actually a good model, being that it's like one of the least populated centers and the least complicated, one of the smaller complications that they would have to deal with. Their population is very, very low. So can that be legitimately expanded to a place like California that used to be maybe the 5th largest economy in the world, and scale that up so it's functional? I think it can. I'm just asking to see if there's any confirmation.
Well, that's why we have just this week, set up a public banking institute. The website is publicbankinginstitute.org, and that's the purpose, is to look into all these issues. A number of states have bills pending, but it seems to me the most feasible way to go is to begin with a feasibility study. Maryland's looking at a feasibility study. I think Massachusetts actually has I guess Washington State actually has the bill. Bill is actually pending now. And there's several others that have done it, to just study what you could do with your own state-owned bank and how to see how feasible it is. One reason we need the government involved is that they've got all the data. We've tried to look, and even though they give you the numbers, they don't really tell you what the numbers are. So you can't really tell unless you've got one of them working on it. Plus, if it's government, they'll fund it. And so they've got a lot more resources than we do to get in there and see what the possibilities are. We just have to inspire them that this could be a great alternative for the states.
Well, and I think that's another important suggestion for a potential solution. I think people, wherever they live, they need to actually don't be afraid of their governments. They need to go and make friends with the people. And I can only tell the listeners, the folks out in the world, your politicians, you vote them into office and you think they know something because they're running. But I'll tell you, you walk in and talk to these people, they don't know the first thing about a lot of stuff. So we're finding, and I don't know, I know you don't know me too much, Ellen. I mean, we've never met and talked before, but I do a lot of property law on my broadcast behind the woodshed there on Oracle. I talk about mining law quite a bit and in current events, but this mining law has been very instrumental in focusing what property law is about in this country and how it actually is so bright line. From there, I went to the county and I suggested that why doesn't the county start coining money and make a local coinage to start to remove themselves from these debts that they enter into as counties through their CAFRs. And then she didn't even know about the CAFR. But I was wondering, when you're saying you don't get the right numbers, what information don't they give you that you can't get through like a Freedom of Information Act request or a document disclosure request at the court level?
Oh, well, I'm sure you could, but it would just be easier. What I was thinking, we were looking at the Bank of North Dakota's website, and they'll tell you what they have in deposits. But did these deposits come from the state? Did they come from municipal governments? Did they come from consumers? They don't give you a breakdown. So it's like you say, it's hard for us to see how that would apply directly to California. But assuming their numbers hold, they have $4,000 worth of deposits per capita in the Bank of North Dakota. And we have 137 million people here in California. So if you project that out, the Bank of California could have on the same, and in North Dakota they have outstanding loans of about 1-to-1. So they've essentially doubled, they've leveraged their deposits at 1-to-1. So we could have $148 billion in deposits in our Bank of California, and on the same scale, then we would have $142 billion, just slightly less, in outstanding loans. Well, that would be easily enough to refinance the deficit. If the government finances it, it's basically interest free, and as long as it's interest free, it doesn't really hurt your budget. Look at the federal government. I mean, they've rolled over debt for hundreds of years. The federal debt has not been paid off since 1836, and it hasn't hurt us. I mean, we've been the strongest country in the world for a long time. So that's been on a fiction, though, right? I mean, that's just a big fiction, and that's the thing that I think is empowering to me. We've done everything on nothing, actually.
We've done it on the idea we could.
Exactly. That's exactly.
I'm actually excited about that.
Yeah, exactly. When I first wrote about this, at first you're appalled and you say, that's horrible. Look what they've done. And then you start thinking about it and you go, well, wait, that was actually a pretty good system. We could do the very same thing, and we could do it in the public interest. And it would be so much more efficient for the people. I mean, it would serve the people so much better, obviously, if the profits all go back to the center instead of being siphoned out by profiteers. I was just reading about this whole foreclosure gate thing. The banks, the people who were responsible for all that graft and greed, were basically just running their banks into the ground. I mean, the banks are going to lose in the end, but they don't care because that's their business model, is just to exploit and then retire and get out of there with your winnings. Whereas if your business model is, if your mandate is to serve the public, and if you're only getting paid as a civil servant, in other words, you're just there to approve creditworthy borrowers, you don't get any fees or commissions, the whole thing has to work much better. Yeah. Well,
it also seems to me that if you look at the natural scheme of things, nature produces. In other words, let's give the example of a seed. You put a seed in the ground, and you're going to get upwards to 7 to 15 times more from a little bit of a seed and a little bit of nourishment over some time. It seems to me people work the same way. So that, you say the state would be charging a small amount of interest. They wouldn't. Again, there's interest-free money. What we're looking for really is just a medium of exchange, not necessarily a system to create money. Because the people, what the people create get monetized to be put in the accounts, then they're going to be always producing more because their nature, they're energetic. They'll produce more than what they got put into them. They'll take their surroundings and be creative and make stuff around that can be monetized. So I don't see what the problem is at that level, and so I'm wondering if maybe we're backing up at the point of looking into. And I agree that maybe you should look at the viabilities of all these things, but to go to the current system's money turnout more than just to see what's available, its value. I think maybe it's better a faster approach just to show maybe a couple of ideas or maybe models of how it would work, and just compare it to the failed system we have today. Just don't even worry about what they got going. Just produce the value that would be existent, monetize it in the new plan, and show show the world from that perspective, and then just go walk to someone who's making the decisions and say, here's what you have, and here's what we're proposing, and see what they say about that.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be great, but we do have some educational work because people just don't understand it. They don't understand that banks create money, that all that credit that they create is just created on their books. And so that's what I'm doing, and that's what our new institute is doing, just trying to get information out there.
Right. Well, I think it's valuable that you're starting. Oh, yeah. No, when I finally came on to the I co-produced Walter Burian's tax retirement video, and I don't quite know where that went. I was doing the video production quite a few years ago when we did that. He couldn't find a producer or a facility, so I asked him to come in so we could get that out for him. But that's when I started really looking at this, and when it came to my mind that we actually, and it's easy to fix the one day the one time at 1933 when we anticipate that there's lots of evidence that the country went into bankruptcy. Essentially, they went from being an asset-based system back to a debt-based system and paper, completely fiat paper from value. Then when I saw that, when I just said before that really societies that went to fiat paper have done everything that we see around us. We've done on worthless paper, which means that we've done everything just by being told it was valuable. When I saw that, I said, wow, why are we making such a mistake about using this private corporations' fiat paper when the state themselves, it's right in the Constitution, can do its own currency, do its own medium of exchange. And so since then, it's like I don't even know why we even need money. At some level, if we're all producing, if we're not just the biggest slouches in the world, just our moving around the world can be, around our country, our states can be monetized for value, because all we're looking for is a convenient, trustable exchange measure with weight and measure for our activity between ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And nowadays, everything's electronic anyway, so you do it all by credit card. So really, all you're talking about is keeping track of the numbers, like how much you owe and how much somebody else owes you. And basically, where all money comes from is you're monetizing something in the future. In other words, you say, I have a dream, I'm going to build this company, and I need some workers and materials, so trust me to pay you back with the proceeds of what I build, and I will. I'll pay you with some interest. So then basically the money is just little receipts where you're acknowledging, okay, I acknowledged I owe all these workers and materials, and I've paid them now because the community has advanced me the credit, and then I will pay the community back that credit out of the proceeds. So you don't need some other party that has put up the money. In other words, the credit, you've monetized your own future. Well, one way to look at it is your own future receivables. That's what they actually used to do when the Italian bankers first set up this whole credit system. They would take these 90-day bills of exchange were actually used as money. That like your goods are coming over on the boat and it's going to take 90 days for them to get there, but you knew there were some goods at the end of the boat trip, so you could use your invoice for these goods and pay somebody at a discount, like maybe they would take it at 80%, and then they could trade it with somebody else maybe at 90%. The closer it got to when the goods actually got to the dock, the more valuable this invoice was, because you were the more sure that the ship wasn't going to sink at sea or something. So basically, you were turning your future receivables into money, and you didn't need to borrow the money from someone else. The invoice itself was the money. It was just the future promise to pay, and it basically showed right in the invoice how you were going to pay it. I mean, you were going to get the goods at the end of the deal.
Well, I think the banking system, the financial system has exposed that money is really just the agreement that money exists. And so everybody's agreed that these pieces of worthless paper have value. And that kind of, when I finally really got into started to see that, it really released me from kind of that servitude. I really don't see any value in Federal Reserve notes anymore. They're kind of they're a waste. They're a scourge in my mind, especially since I started to look at the value difference between my silver 90% silver 50-cent piece that I've watched sit on a counter here. I have watched it. When I got it, I had a DVD that I do for mining law with a colleague of mine, trying to educate the miners into the laws they forgot were there that really give them a lot of power. But somebody paid me for one of the DVDs it was a different issue on a permit, explaining a permit that the miners don't need to get, that they get forced down. But someone handed me a 50-cent piece, 90% silver, this summer, and it was worth about $7.50 then. And I look at that thing right now, and I notice it's like doubled in value, just sitting right here before me. But I look at the change that I got from the, which actually was it's minted that way. It's not really federal fiat paper, but it's based in the dollar, so it's based in the fiat value. That all the 2 jars of change I had will no longer buy that 50-cent piece. So I have a very good education sitting right in front of me that I never really thought about before. But when you have substance of weight and measure and intrinsic value versus worthless paper, that maybe our whole mistake was to move into the worthless paper. Now that said, then that means all we need to do is base our currency that everyone can trust on something of substance. And then getting over to the asset monetization where a state, and just for example, it kind of got it even more exciting for me. We look and we build a highway, and we have the state monetize the value of that highway. And like you're saying, you go into the future. You have an asset that will go into the future. Well, a highway goes into the future. It sits there just by its own substance, by its existence. It's going to go into the future. And then I realized, then you have the utility that comes from that infrastructure. And essentially, I started to see how you could monetize the value that was running over the top of that first asset that was developed. And you could develop a system essentially that was absolutely functioning without debt, without any kind of thought, and you don't even really need to consider these ideas. We're never debtors again then. I think this has been a big problem, a big psychological depression on us, that we think we need to be debtors to function, and in fact, we don't. And debtors don't have rights. Debtors aren't a master. When non-debtors, people that are able to have non-debt lives, non-obligated lives, they are actually free. And so this whole thought starts to wrap up into you start seeing how bad it was when we went into fiat paper that can be printed and monetized and then taxed and silently taxed and controlled. And now you see, as you're bringing out, the banks were made for the banks, and the bankers and the financiers, and it's just a closed, happy society, and they can print as much for themselves as they want, and they leave the rest of us to starve. And yet, you also expose in your article that maybe the states have made a problem. That's we, the people, have made a problem by continuing to allow it. So we have the ability to stop this immediately, and I'm encouraged that you guys you have some people that are starting together to look at the viability of these alternative issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would expand on your idea about monetizing the highway. That's the whole idea here. Let's say you got the $142 billion for Californians. You have this huge amount of credit, and you don't have to think of it as debt. Think of it as credit. You're going to buy this stuff on credit. Now, let's say you may, one model that's always proposed is the maglev trains that they have in Europe and Japan. I mean, everybody but us has this really sophisticated train system. If you travel around the world, it's so much easier to get public transport anywhere but here. Like Los Angeles is the worst. My daughter doesn't drive, and she won't even come to Los Angeles because she has a visual problem, but because you can't get around in this city without a car, whereas she lives in Basel, Switzerland, and you just step out the door and this very fast public transport will take you somewhere. Anyway, let's say we put in this maglev train from San Diego to Sacramento, and you use this credit to pay the workers, pay the materials. Then now you've got a functioning train that will you charge fees for it. And then the fees, the user fees, go back and pay off the loan. It's so much more clean and efficient than charging taxes, because a lot of people that you tax aren't going to use that particular project that you just built. But if you can charge for the particular project, in other words, monetize it first and then pay it off with the proceeds, it's more fair. And it works, and it's a way to develop in the future instead of always being, Europe has the problem, and all the countries that are on the euro have the problem that nobody in that system has the power to increase the money supply. And because everybody has borrowed at interest, more money is always owed back than was created as loans in the first place, and therefore they're all sinking. The only way they can possibly keep that system viable is the European Central Bank is going to have to step up and say, all right, we're going to create some credit here and give it to each of the European Union's countries. But they haven't done that so far, and that's the problem, is that they have a very restricted, limited money supply. So what you need is the ability to expand in response to the demand for goods and services or for productivity.
Yeah, but we can't take the existing system that's been established by the global financiers and compare it to what we would want to do or how it's not working. We're looking at making a whole new, it's not a new paradigm. It's taking some principles and and actually implementing them in a more productive way for most of the people. I guess what I was getting at is when you do this system the way I conceive it, at least in my mind, when you start monetizing the fact that someone using the train is actually going to make some more asset value to the state that's monetized, since they're doing that to us anyway, but they might as well the people themselves might get credit. That one that jumps on that train for that purpose doesn't have to pay a fee. He's actually adding value to the system by writing the system. It's not much different than what Walter Burien says. If you construct and that's strictly through his CAFR review and how it would be remodified so it will do this. The CAFR incomes through the enterprises, what they call the public-private partnerships, and I don't want to drive off into that big, vast corruption by itself. But when you try to in remodifying this to make it work for us and not the financiers or the internationalists, all these enterprises are bringing more money, if you will, into the system by monetized asset value. You don't have taxes then, because the system being used is actually it's value added on top of the already asset monetized system. And I think that's part of what you're seeing in states like North Dakota when they're saying, we're getting too much coming in. I think that's part of what we're seeing, and it's not been recognized. At some level, you don't have to have fees and taxes, because if you're monetizing the value added like they do now, and they put it on as contributing to the wealth of the people, the wealth of the state, from which the state gets its ability to coin or print let's say just to coin the money, because that'd be the constitutional side, to run inside the state. then I think you're looking at a system that's self-preserving, because the system itself, again, it's a life. You're actually getting the multiplication of the life that's within that system and feeding itself, which is most natural systems tend to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, but you're still going to, if you have a whole lot of extra money out there and you don't pull it back into the government, you put it out there as credit, you pay the workers and materials, they've got more money in their wallets now. If you don't pull it back to the center somehow, you will have inflation, price inflation, because you'll have more.
I'm not an expert at all. What I would just suggest something. The government is only looking for a way to monetize the money that it needs. As the needs of the society expand, so does the printing does. It only expands to the level of the need. So we're not looking at because we have an asset doesn't mean we throw money in the system. It means that we have on the shelf an asset that we could monetize. So the whole regulation function is really what you monetize and when you monetize it, or if you monetize it. It doesn't mean that value you put out is monetized. It's that it sits like a gold bar on the shelf. It happens to be we use this gold bar now. It's called a highway. Instead of it sitting on a shelf in the vault, it's actually out in the real world working. We don't have to monetize it if doing so would diminish the value, or it cause an inflation, or whatever the trick was. So the regulator would be the government just saying, okay, this is how the people trust. They go, listen, we don't have to worry about the money we're printing at this level. We have all these assets backing it up. And so this is not like what we see where there's stuff created out of thin air. Everybody can see the highway. Everybody knows what the value is, and everybody knows that the accountant said there was X amount of dollars valued from there, X amount of dollars valued added use to that. We only needed half of that to print for the functioning money of the state, and that's all we did print. And everybody can see that. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of this idea that they kind of come to me. But I think the regulation of the dollars is really, do you have an asset to trust that you monetize, the value of which went back into the system and only at the level of the need that the society had for its expansion? Yeah.
Well, I think you need computer models or something to prove that. There are some things, like it's data I always see is the GI Bill, where the government paid to put these GIs through school, and it didn't cost them very much in those days in the 40s. It didn't cost much to put them through school or to train them in some way. And then over the next 40 years, they all paid more taxes because they had better paying jobs, and so it paid for itself many times over, that program. But if you didn't collect the taxes, it seems to me that if you're going to keep pumping money out, I mean, you had that problem in the American colonies where they just printed and they didn't pull the money back in. Some of them did and some of them didn't. So Pennsylvania, for example, was a completely sustainable system because they operated their own bank. It was the first publicly owned bank in the U.S. It was set up by the Quakers, and they had brought it over from England, that idea. And the Quakers, like the Jews, were sort of a shunned sect, and so they weren't allowed to go into commerce. And so instead they went into banking. But instead of setting up a usury bank system, they set up a public banking system and brought this model over to Pennsylvania. And then Benjamin Franklin saw it and saw how great it worked and wrote about it. But during the period that bank was in place, they paid no taxes because they didn't need to. They charged interest, and 5% interest, and then the interest alone was enough to fund the government. Plus, they had the ability to print money, so they printed whatever, a little extra, to cover the interest. I mean, anyway, mathematically, it was a totally sustainable system. But other colonies, the northern colonies particularly, tended to just print and spend. And they did do a lot of development. I mean, it was good for the state in the sense that, for the colony, in the sense that they got a lot of infrastructure built that way. But it did sort of wreak havoc on the value of the currency. And so the British merchants were complaining. They said they didn't know what they were getting paid in. They'd get paid in one currency and then it would lose value compared to another. And so that's when the King of England King George said that we couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't print our own money. And some historians say that was the real reason for the revolution, we were then beholden to the British bankers. We had to borrow supposedly their gold, but it was just their Bank of England banknotes that were supposedly backed by gold. We had to borrow and pay interest when before we had our own money system. And so obviously that created a big depression, and then the farmers were losing their farms, and then they rebelled, and that's what prompted the revolution. But anyway, what went wrong there was that some governments were just printing and spending without bringing it back in some way. You have to keep a balance it's a flow. Money is a flow, and so it's got to.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just saying that flow is regulated by the state also, so they can destroy money as much as they can add money into the system as they need it. I mean, it's just a matter of when you call the money that you. And I'm getting a little bit more of experience in this because in being in mining and and knowing a couple of big miners, I'm now understanding you can monetize these assets that sit in the ground. There's a whole process for this behind the scenes that I was totally aware of. I'm sure people are absolutely unaware of. That they are accepted in to be monetized, and then that money is get bonded, and they got all kinds of other derivative type stuff they put on it. But just the function of the value, they don't have to print that money, and they can destroy. You know that the Federal Reserve notes, they got to go and you got this cycle. That's the Federal Reserve cycle to keep. That's how the fraud works. But if the government, and especially if you're in a society that now the regulator, the government oppression has been pulled off, and people can create, and people aren't taxed to death and are taxed at all, they're going to start to be, I believe, that maybe I'm an optimist, they're going to be working toward better ways of doing things. They won't even have to work, crime kind of goes out because it's easy. They can just do what they want to do as they need to do it. The government then only has to keep up with the need and demand for the money that's being circulated. They can always pull that. If it becomes too much, they just pull it back. But I don't know that we're looking at a time that everyone's got to eat something. There's going to be, exactly. Everyone's going to use, stuff will break. So at some point, there's going to be an equilibrium, short of the natural expansion of the population and what it needs and what it does. But at some level, I don't know that we're going to see I think our minds are kind of constrained by this model completely. We need to take the good parts of it, which I think we can see, and get rid of the idea that we have no control of destroying money that's once created. All the government has to do is just pull it back out of circulation when it finds out it doesn't need it, and it's got the asset value back there that's always working. So again, when you do it and this is a simple idea because it's just in the infrastructure side. On the highway side, the highway is still out there. I mean, it's still functioning, so it's still allowing wealth creation.
Yeah, but pulling it back in is taxes. That's the definition of taxes. The government pulls the money back in. I mean, that's what there's this whole school of economics that says that they don't really tax to make the money to spend. The government spends the money first, just like a bank does. It creates the money and it decides what it's going to spend and it spends it. And then it taxes basically to balance the money supply, because once you put the money out, then you've got to pull it back in to keep it circular. But I agree with you. We could do it without taxes. I think we could run the whole system without taxes, which seem a bit unfair. But you do need to pull the money in some way. So I would say what you use, you pay for. Just like if you're riding on this train, you pay the fee for the train, and that would be enough. If it's an interest-free loan to create the train, you can make it for half the cost. Interest has been shown to compose, on average, 50% of the cost of government projects. So here you've got a train that you made quite cheaply, and you only have to pay back that credit only to keep the money supply in balance. And you can pay that back relatively easily just by charging people a very reasonable fee for riding from LA to San Francisco.
Well, yeah, whatever. I mean, like I said, my mind kind of it kind of runs around. It doesn't have anything real settled. But let me touch one thing and then get to this other. I believe that we're being mind controlled. If you will, we're being focused on what we call the two theories that I really haven't studied because for myself, I quickly recognized that they were both traps. They're both theories. They're just ideas that people think that work, the Keynesian and the Austrian. And I realized by some other research I've done that the people that spoke on either side, they're just the way the dynamics was. It just led me to know because of a lot of other things I've seen in my magic decoder ring that I've developed over a couple decades of research, that they're both failed systems, and they're both theories. We hear lots of theories, lots of models, and it occurred to me that we can create a third model that actually works for people, and we don't have to be constrained by those theories. We don't have to be constrained by all of that. So, however it works out, whether we pay fees or not, whether we find out we have to bring money back in, I'm thinking that we have a pretty exciting thing to look at, where the states take on this opportunity to take on the better parts of what we see, to monetize the assets of the state, to turn it back out. And if there has to be a fee generated just to return the money, if we can't fix, I think that's a failure. It's an inefficiency in an economic system where all we're up to is creating a medium of exchange that we all can trust. So that it's really a medium of exchange. It's like a time machine. One time I need something now, but I really don't need what the guy he doesn't need what I have to offer. So that medium of exchange is kind of an ameliorating time machine that allows me to go to the next guy some later or woman in the future to get to trade that medium for something that he does want from me, that he might want from me, or something like that. So whether or not it's fees, I think the idea that the states are being told, we're not going to bail you out, that you find out in your research that it's the banks are supporting the banks, and that's the way it's always been. I think this is great opportunity, and as you're doing this, as your people are doing the research, to actually step into this void when times are so darn tough on people, to say, hey, folks, we can do it a better way. And whether or not someone pays a fee at the end, that's kind of incidental to the overall issue that we're looking at bringing back a substance into our life, a medium that maintains substance. And like I said, that silver coin, it's gone up in value only relative to worthless security. And in a fiction that worthless security even has any value. But that coin actually represents the steady state. In other words, if I dealt in all those coins, I'd still be living in the prices of the 50s or so. Our economic value of life really hasn't changed since they brought the system in force, since the 50s. So it seems to me we're going to see a lot of more benefits than and then it's just trifling looking at whether I think a fee will be charged or not. But I'm encouraged that you have people working toward it, because I think we have a view that could actually end the need for central banks, could end the need for all this taxation, for all this control, and this fraud that goes on to just pound people into the ground and just destroy their lives.
Mm-hmm. I agree. There's a third way, and that's what we have to do. We have to readjust our thinking. The Keynesian, what went wrong with that system was that it was based on debt. The government borrowed, but the government borrowed from private banks. And the private banks create the money in our system. All of our money today is created by private banks in the form of loans. So they get the seigniorage on that. They get the benefit of the spread, the difference between they get the interest on it, and they get control over who gets the money. And they get to speculate it with it and all those things that we don't have that advantage. So if we could use their system, we don't have to change all that much, because the credit system invented by the banks was really a good idea, but it needs to be a public system. First of all, the states could get funding way cheaper. The banks fund each other or can borrow from each other at 0.2%, like almost nothing. They can get money from each other. And the states are borrowing at, I think, 4.7% is the average. So, and then they have to pay like late fees, and they have to worry about their credit rating, and they have to go to the voters with the bond issue. And it's a big mess for state and local governments to raise money if they don't calculate their budget right. That's why they have these huge rainy day funds that Walter Burien was writing about, because they don't have credit lines. But if they had an instant credit line, just like the banks do with each other, if the municipal governments could go to the state bank and just get a loan if they happen to miscalculate their budget, they wouldn't need those rainy day funds. Then, like you said, they could put them to much better use. They could leverage them, whatever. They could do many things with them. So we can take the best of both worlds and both systems and merge it into a third possibility, something that's actually designed to serve the people.
Yeah, I don't think there's much that there's much difference that needs to be done. We just need to take the benefits that the Fed is getting and put it within the states. And we don't have to change a whole lot, actually. When I looked at when you look at the CAFR concept, and you realize it's just a readjustment of definitions almost. It's a redirection and a repurposing of what's already existing. It's really not a change. This is what was fascinating to me. It just seems that we've kind of got it no different than we chose to take fiat paper instead of coin. We can just kind of do the same thing with fiat paper, but put it into the substance of the work of the output of the people of the state themselves. In the things that they do. It just fascinates me that we have the answer on the right here, and all we have to do as people and listeners, folks, if you're looking for something to do, there's lots of places to grab the rope to pull down the edifices of false power. You can go down to your local legislators and tell them these ideas. You can set up the plan, create the models. You're saying about the computer model, needing to have computer models. I was hoping that I was using my brain. I hope that was computerized enough. Being in this digital society, that we haven't dropped that out of the perspective. But no, I'm so at some level I'm so very excited. I'm just so out of political touch and always and doing my other thing with the mining. I can only be spread so thin. But I'm encouraged that you're on this, and I encourage you to keep going. I think once we get the fog cleared a little bit, I think we're going to see it's a lot simpler answer to all this. And so I'm just excited at that one level, hoping that it works. Not seeing that it has yet. Oh, go ahead.
We've been held back really for hundreds of years by this system that drains profits off the top. And there's a more efficient way we can use it. So, I mean, always, I hate to reveal my age, but I went to college in the 60s, and we had this vision of that the 21st century would be this wonderful time when everything would change and we could manifest all our potential. And I think that's actually possible. But the first thing we have to do is manifest our financial potential. It's that whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where if you're down at the bottom level dealing with food and shelter, you can't really get up to the higher levels where you can do more fulfilling things. So they've kept us. Right. I don't know who they is, right. But our system has kept us at the bottom rungs where everybody is scrambling for food and shelter. I mean, even fairly wealthy people, they're still scrambling. I mean, I was one of those. I was a lawyer with 2 kids, and we had to maintain the nice house. And so both parents are working, and you hardly ever see the kids, and you're so exhausted by the time I was trying to be a writer right. and until today. Now it's even down to the kids, I mean, it's ridiculous. And I think you got it exactly right, and that's one of the control points. But I think through your work and lots of people work, and then the Internet being so wonderful for interconnection, despite the fact you have to learn to discern, the way people can communicate through the Internet has allowed us to find out who the ubiquitous they is. Maybe not all of them, but we can find some of them. And I think your study here on the Federal Reserve and the bankers opens us up a little bit more into the position, and we can learn. I hope we can learn what's gone on and how to change all that. And I think, and I'm going to move a little bit on. We have a few more minutes here, and I think again because of the Internet, because of what's going on, and I think you've written, and I think I've read short snippets of some of your work and didn't know it. I mean, didn't know you at the time, but I was compiling information for my broadcast on Oracle. I do that on Sunday in the afternoon if people are interested at noon o'clock Pacific, oraclebroadcasting.com. It's called Behind the Woodshed, and I talk a lot about this. And I would bring up, I believe I've read, Arlen, your some of your snippets of your articles in preparing for my listeners at the time. How to enter into this foreclosure, another exposure of this other fraud. It's like the derivative of accumulation of the fraud and the ability for them to print up money out of whatever agreements they make behind the scenes. I want to move a little bit into the foreclosure where there's lots of people now finding out that maybe the banks don't have authority, or maybe the servicers don't have authority because something very serious went on between the mortgage and the title, and there was the latest Massachusetts court ruling here exposing who they are and how they're doing it and how we can stop it has popped up. And I don't know if if I remember right, you did some work on foreclosures.
Are you familiar on that? And maybe we can discuss that in
Yeah.
the last few minutes, because I think it's another powerful solution for people. And listeners, I have to tell you, folks, if you're in America or you take on these American loans, you don't have to wait till foreclosure. I'm helping a lot of people that are going against this situation before foreclosure. So understand, this is this big ruling in Massachusetts. Kind of explain that for our listeners in the last few minutes and see if we can pair off a little bit for them.
Okay, and I'd love to hear your solutions too, because that's something we're going to link to our Public Banking Institute website, foreclosure relief. And what we need to do is get organized. You know, people are afraid to stand up to the bank by themselves, but if they have some guidance and they know what other people have done, it's not that hard to go improper and file your own pleadings, but you need to know the pleadings. So what you basically do is copy somebody else's pleadings that's prevailed. That's how law is practiced. I was a litigator, and that's what we did all the time. We just copied the form book. You know, it's just form pleadings. But anyway, so this recent case in Massachusetts Supreme Court held that U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo did not have standing to foreclose on two pieces of property because they had been securitized. So they had had broken the chain of title. MERS had broken the chain of title, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. But all of these 66 million homes now are held in the name of MERS. I mean, half of 60%, I think. Oh, wait, I've got my numbers wrong. Anyway, 60% of mortgages are held in the name of MERS, this electronic registration systems. They're all securitized. So that means most of the homes in the country cannot be foreclosed upon. That doesn't mean that you don't owe the money to someone, but you have a lot more negotiating power now because, first of all, whoever you owe it to has to come forward and prove that they're the party you owe it to, and that's pretty hard for these investors where the stuff gets moved around all the time. And second of all, if they've been paid by somebody else, then they don't have any damages, so they don't have a claim. And many of these investors have been paid with credit default swaps. You know, they got this insurance, derivative insurance called credit default swaps. So that gives the homeowners a lot of leverage. And I think if we got organized, we could have real leverage in Congress. That's the problem. Right now, the thing is that the banks are going to go to Congress and say, you've got to get us out of this mess or we're going to collapse again. But they created the mess. So we have to be powerful enough to say, no, this is a fraud, and they created it themselves. We've got to let them go. And the other thing we have to do is show that we have an alternative here. They are not too big to fail because we can set up our own banks that function much more smoothly because they're designed to serve the public interest.
Right. So well, not only that, but we have the discussion that says, how can you bail out a fraud? I mean, they would have to be complicit with the continuing fraud to continue this. It
would wreak havoc if the Congress says that MERS is valid. It's going to wreck the property law system that's been the foundation of economics in the U.S. and Europe and everywhere else for hundreds of years. So, you know, it would be a fraud on the homeowners who would no longer have their defenses. They're entitled to their day in court. And it would be a fraud on the investors who also would lose their claim against the banks. And they have very good claims against the banks. I mean, the investors, many of them, you know, just lost. They were just out of luck because the banks purposely took these bad mortgages that they knew were subprime and they pawned them off as being prime when they weren't.
That's right, and that's the continue. It's a big debacle all the way around. But it's the continuation of fraud, and they allowed that. And again, I want to just talk back to the listeners, folks. You are probably unfamiliar with your courts. That was probably by plan. But as Ellen was just saying, there's a lot of boilerplate forms you can get to do this. I would ask you to go on the internet. Again, it's a wonderful thing. Find your local jurisdiction. Get the civil rules, the rules of civil procedure. They're just, you got to kind of read them for a while and live with them, but the procedures are laid out. Get on the internet. You're going to find lots of people that are helping with information. I can't remember the gentleman's website I found. I don't know anything about a guy named George Tran. I think Free in 90 or something like that, folks. Put that in. He's got some information that he'll download on an honor basis. You can download. He can give you an idea where you're going to go. He's into foreclosure, from what I understand, but you don't have to wait. Once you find out there's a nominal party that took over that is demanding money from you, and they can't show the title, it's over. You got to move, and you're going to have to take those steps. So I understand we're getting down in the next few minutes. Ellen, thank you for this discussion, all this last hour. I appreciate it. I'm excited to hear that there's people working on this the reinvestigation of how we monetize this country, get the people back out from underneath the thumb of these world controllers, essentially. But thank you very much for today, and give us your website and your book and everything else as we close.
Okay. Webofdebt.com is my website for my book, and the book is Web of Debt. And then our new website is publicbankinginstitute.org. And I have 11 books, so all my other books are on ellenbrown.com. And thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I do appreciate it. Thank you again for coming on late with a very short notice. I appreciate that you could do that and spend the time. And Karen, if you're there, we can use the walkout. And thank you again.
Thank you.
I am, and I want to thank you, Ellen and Hal. And Ellen, we're planning a strike here starting April 15th again. It'll be the second time for that